The blood-red horizon swallowed the last rays of sunlight as Eleanor Everett stumbled through the rugged terrain of the Arizona desert, her once elegant boots torn, and her throat raw from hours of desperate cries. It was 1875, and the unforgiving landscape of the American frontier showed no mercy to those who wandered unprepared, especially not to a woman alone. Eleanor had been traveling by stagecoach to Agua Caliente when bandits attacked. In the chaos, she'd fled into the wilderness, hopelessly lost as night descended. Her water canteen had emptied hours ago, and the relentless heat had given way to the desert's bitter cold. Shadows stretched like grasping hands across the sand as she collapsed against a large boulder, her strength finally failing. "Help," she called again, her voice nothing but a ragged whisper. "Please, someone." The sound of hoofbeats cut through the stillness of the night. Eleanor stiffened, uncertain whether to feel hope or terror. Bandits or salvation. She lacked the strength to run either way. A tall figure on horseback materialized from the darkness. The man dismounted with fluid grace, his spurs jingling softly as his boots hit the ground. His face remained shadowed beneath his wide-brimmed hat, but his silhouette against the rising moon was unmistakably that of a cowboy. "Madam," his voice was deep, tinged with concern. "You all right?" Eleanor tried to respond, but her parched throat produced only a hoarse croak. Tears of frustration and relief mingled on her dust-streaked face. "Help," she finally managed, the word barely audible. The cowboy stepped closer, kneeling beside her. In the moonlight, she could now see his face weathered by sun and wind, with intelligent gray eyes that assessed her condition swiftly. "You don't have to ask twice," he said, already uncorking his canteen. "Small sips now, don't want to shock your system." Eleanor's trembling hands reached for the water, and he helped guide it to her lips. The cool liquid felt like salvation itself. "I'm Wyatt Daniels," he said, his voice steady and reassuring as he draped his coat around her shoulders. "Ranch foreman at the Double Creek." "What in God's name are you doing out here alone, miss?" "Eleanor Everett," she whispered after taking another careful sip. "Stagecoach. Attacked, I ran, got lost." Wyatt's expression hardened momentarily. "Chambers' gang, most likely. They've been hitting the coaches between Tucson and Agua Caliente." He glanced around, surveying the darkness. "We need to get you somewhere safe." "Can you ride?" Eleanor nodded weakly, though in truth she wasn't certain. Wyatt seemed to read her doubt. "I'll help you," he said, his voice gentle despite its firmness. "My horse, Thatcher, is strong enough for two. Just hold on to me and we'll have you at the ranch before you know it." With surprising tenderness for such calloused hands, Wyatt helped Eleanor to her feet. The world tilted alarmingly, and she stumbled against his chest. He steadied her without comment, his strength a quiet reassurance in the vastness of the desert night. "Thank you," Eleanor whispered, her voice still rough from her hours of calling for help. "I thought I would die out here." "Not while I'm around," Wyatt replied simply, as if rescuing lost women in the desert was an everyday occurrence. He helped her mount his horse before swinging up behind her. "It's about an hour's ride to the ranch. Mrs. Holloway, our cook, will fix you right up." As they rode through the moonlit desert, Eleanor leaned back against the solid warmth of the cowboy's chest. His arms encircled her as he held the reins, creating a sanctuary of safety she hadn't expected to find in this harsh land. "What brings you to Agua Caliente, Miss Everett?" Wyatt asked after they'd ridden in silence for a while. Eleanor closed her eyes, finding it strange to engage in such ordinary conversation after her ordeal. "My uncle, Jonathan Everett. He owns the apothecary in town. After my parents died of influenza in Boston last winter, he offered me a home and work in his shop." She felt rather than saw Wyatt nod. I know John Everett. Good man. Fair prices, even when medicine's scarce. After a pause, he added, he'll be worried. We'll send word to town tomorrow that you're safe. The moon climbed higher as they rode, casting the desert in silver light. Rock formations took on ghostly aspects, and in the distance, coyotes called to one another. Under different circumstances, Eleanor might have found it beautiful. There it is, Wyatt said eventually, pointing toward a cluster of lights in a valley ahead. Double Creek Ranch. As they drew closer, Eleanor could make out a substantial main house, several outbuildings, and a large barn, all surrounded by split-rail fencing. Dogs began to bark as they approached, and a lantern appeared on the porch of the main house. "Wyatt, that you?" called a woman's voice. "It's me, Mrs. Holloway," he called back, "and I've brought a guest who needs some tending to." The woman on the porch lifted her lantern higher, revealing a round face framed by gray streaked hair. Her eyes widened at the sight of Eleanor. "Lord have mercy," she exclaimed. "Bring her in right away." The next hour passed in a blur for Eleanor. Mrs. Holloway, a motherly woman with efficient hands and a no-nonsense attitude, helped her bathe and provided a clean nightgown. Wyatt had disappeared after delivering Eleanor to the housekeeper's care, leaving her with an awkward tip of his hat and a promise to check on her in the morning. Now, settled in a small but comfortable bedroom, Eleanor sipped hot broth while Mrs. Holloway fussed over her bruised feet. "Stagecoach robbery," the older woman clucked disapprovingly. "Third one this month. Sheriff Marshall needs to do something about those Chambers boys before someone gets killed." "I was fortunate Mr. Daniels found me," Eleanor said, her voice still raspy but improving with each sip of broth. Mrs. Holloway nodded. "Providence, that's what it was." "Wyatt doesn't usually ride that south section at night. Said something made him change his route." She looked up at Eleanor with a knowing smile. "Sometimes God puts people exactly where they need to be." Eleanor wasn't sure about divine intervention, but she couldn't deny the extraordinary luck of Wyatt's appearance. "He seems like a good man." "One of the best," Mrs. Holloway agreed, applying salve to a particularly nasty cut on Eleanor's heel. "Keeps this place running smooth as silk for Mr. Harrington. The owner," she added by way of explanation. "Lives back east most of the time. Comes twice a year to check the books." After Mrs. Holloway left, Eleanor sank back against the pillows, exhaustion finally claiming her. As sleep approached, her mind drifted to the cowboy who had saved her life, his strong, steady hands and the quiet confidence in his gray eyes. In her last moments of consciousness, she wondered if she would see him again before she continued to her uncle's home in town. Morning arrived with the crowing of roosters and the distant lowing of cattle. Eleanor woke disoriented, momentarily forgetting where she was until the events of the previous day rushed back. She rose gingerly, finding her feet tender but functional. On a chair near the bed, someone had laid out a simple cotton dress, clearly borrowed but clean and approximately her size. After dressing, Eleanor made her way downstairs, following the aroma of coffee and bacon. The ranch house was larger than it had appeared in the darkness, a substantial two-story structure with worn but quality furnishings. Photographs and paintings hung on the walls, mostly landscapes and formal portraits of people she assumed were the Harrington family. In the dining room, she found several men already seated around a large oak table. They fell silent as she entered, and a few hastily removed their hats. Wyatt, seated at the far end, stood immediately. "Miss Everett," he said with a slight nod. "Glad to see you on your feet. Please join us." He gestured to an empty chair beside him. Eleanor took the offered seat, acutely aware of the curious glances from the other men. Mrs. Holloway appeared from the kitchen with a plate piled high with eggs, bacon, and biscuits, setting it before Eleanor with a motherly pat on her shoulder. "Eat up, dear. You need your strength." Wyatt cleared his throat and addressed the table. "For those who haven't heard, this is Miss Eleanor Everett. She's Jonathan Everett's niece from back east, headed to Agua Caliente when her stagecoach was attacked." He glanced at Eleanor. "Miss Everett, these are some of the Double Creek hands." The men introduced themselves: Tom, a grizzled older cowhand; Marcus, the young stable master; and Carlos, who managed the ranch's small but productive orchard. Their names and faces blurred together in Eleanor's still exhausted mind, but she appreciated their polite nods and respectful demeanors. "I've sent Jed into town with a message for your uncle," Wyatt informed her as she ate. "He should be back by midday with a response. I expect Mr. Everett will want to come fetch you himself, but if he can't get away from the shop, I'll take you into town tomorrow." "Thank you," Eleanor said, meeting his eyes. In the daylight, she could see them more clearly, not simply gray, but a fascinating mixture of gray and blue, like the sky before a storm. For everything. Something in Wyatt's expression softened momentarily before he looked away, suddenly very interested in his coffee cup. "Just doing what anyone would do." "Not anyone would ride out in the desert at night," she countered quietly. Before he could respond, the conversation was interrupted by the arrival of a tall, imposing man with a silver-streaked beard and a limp. The room fell silent as he entered, and Eleanor noticed how the ranch hands straightened almost imperceptibly. "Mr. Harrington," Wyatt said, standing again. "I thought you were still in Prescott." "Came back early," the man replied gruffly, his sharp eyes finding Eleanor. "And who might this be?" Wyatt quickly explained the situation. Mr. Harrington, whom Eleanor now understood was the ranch owner, apparently not as absent as Mrs. Holloway had suggested, listened with a deepening frown. "Chambers' gang again," he muttered. "Bold as brass now, hitting coaches in broad daylight." He turned to Eleanor with an evaluating gaze. "You're welcome here until your uncle comes, Miss Everett. The Double Creek looks after its own." "I'm not," Eleanor began. "John Everett supplies this ranch with medicines, salves, and tinctures that keep my men and cattle healthy," Harrington interrupted. "That makes you one of ours while you're here." His tone brooked no argument. After breakfast, Wyatt excused himself to attend to his duties, leaving Eleanor uncertain what to do with herself. Mrs. Holloway solved this dilemma by enlisting her help with mending simple work that wouldn't strain her recovering body but would keep her occupied. As Eleanor sat on the front porch, needle flashing through a torn shirt, she watched the activities of the ranch unfold before her. Cowboys moved between the barn and the corrals, horses neighed and stomped, and in the distance, a herd of cattle grazed on the sparse desert vegetation. It was a world utterly foreign to her Boston upbringing, yet there was something captivating about its raw vitality. Occasionally, she caught glimpses of Wyatt directing men, examining a horse's hoof, deep in conversation with Mr. Harrington. He moved with purpose and authority, clearly respected by everyone on the ranch. Several times she thought she felt his gaze turn toward the porch, but whenever she looked up, he was focused elsewhere. Around noon, a rider approached at a gallop, kicking up dust from the dry earth. Eleanor set aside her mending and shaded her eyes, recognizing the young ranch hand called Jed. He reined in his horse near the porch. "Miss Everett," he called, touching the brim of his hat. "Your uncle says he'll be here by sundown to collect you. Sends his regards and his thanks to Mr. Daniels." Relief flooded through Eleanor. Her uncle was coming. Soon, she would begin the life she had journeyed so far to create: a quiet existence, helping in his apothecary shop, healing from the loss of her parents, finding her place in this new world. Yet as she looked around at the sprawling ranch, a peculiar twinge of regret surprised her. One more night, she thought. One more night to thank the man who had saved her life. As promised, Jonathan Everett arrived just as the sun was setting, driving a sturdy wagon pulled by 2 mules. Eleanor watched from the porch as her uncle, a thin man with spectacles and a gentle demeanor, so at odds with the rugged landscape, shook hands with Wyatt and Mr. Harrington. "Uncle John," she called, descending the steps to embrace him. "Eleanor, my dear girl." He hugged her tightly. "When I heard about the stagecoach, thank God you're safe." Over her uncle's shoulder, Eleanor's eyes met Wyatt's. Something unspoken passed between them, a connection forged in that moment of rescue that felt both significant and impossible to define. "Mr. Daniels saved my life," she told her uncle, stepping back from the embrace. Jonathan turned to Wyatt, extending his hand once more. "I'm forever in your debt, sir. Anything you ever need from my shop is yours without charge." Wyatt shook his head, though he accepted the handshake. "That's not necessary, Mr. Everett. Just glad I was there." "Nevertheless," Jonathan insisted, "my niece is all the family I have left in this world." Eleanor gathered her few belongings. Her own clothes had been washed and mended by Mrs. Holloway's capable hands and prepared to depart. The ranch hands had assembled to see her off, and she thanked each one for their hospitality. When she reached Wyatt, she found herself suddenly tongue-tied. "I don't know how to thank you properly," she finally managed. "Seeing you recovered is thanks enough," he replied, his voice low enough that only she could hear. "Take care in town, Miss Everett. Agua Caliente has its charms, but it's still frontier country. Will I see you again?" The question slipped out before she could consider its propriety. Something like a smile touched his lips. "I come to town for supplies every other Saturday. Your uncle's shop is always my first stop." With those words lingering between them, Eleanor climbed into her uncle's wagon. As they pulled away from the Double Creek Ranch, she looked back once to see Wyatt still standing where she'd left him, his tall figure silhouetted against the golden light spilling from the ranch house windows. Life in Agua Caliente proved both simpler and more complex than Eleanor had anticipated. The town itself was a curious mix of adobe buildings and wooden structures, with a main street that alternated between dust bowl and mud pit, depending on the weather. Her uncle's apothecary shop occupied a prime location near the center of town, with their living quarters situated in the rooms above. Jonathan Everett was a kind, scholarly man who had come west for his health 15 years earlier and found his calling providing medicines to the frontier community. His shop contained an eclectic mixture of traditional pharmaceuticals, herbal remedies, and imported goods from Mexico and beyond. Eleanor, with her basic nursing training from Boston, quickly proved herself a valuable assistant. "You have a natural gift," her uncle told her after watching her prepare a poultice for Mrs. Rodriguez's arthritis. "Your mother had the same touch, gentle but confident." The mention of her mother brought a familiar ache to Eleanor's heart, but it was softened by the pride in her uncle's voice. "She taught me what she knew," she replied simply. Days fell into a comfortable pattern. Mornings were spent preparing the day's remedies and organizing stock. Afternoons brought a steady stream of customers, ranchers with injuries, mothers with feverish children, miners with chronic coughs from years underground. Eleanor found satisfaction in this work, in the tangible difference they made in people's lives. Evenings were quiet, often spent reading by lamplight or listening to her uncle play his violin, a surprising talent in a frontier apothecary. Occasionally, they would walk to the small church for community gatherings or to the hotel dining room for a change of scenery. Through it all, Eleanor found her thoughts returning often to the Double Creek Ranch and its taciturn foreman. She told herself it was natural to think of the man who had saved her life, That gratitude explained the way her heart quickened when someone mentioned his name. But in her most honest moments, alone in her narrow bed, she acknowledged it was more than that. 2 weeks after her arrival in Agua Caliente, Eleanor was arranging bottles of tincture on a shelf when the bell above the shop door jingled. She turned with her customary greeting on her lips, only to have the words die away at the sight of Wyatt Daniels filling the doorway. He removed his hat, revealing hair the color of chestnuts that curled slightly where it met his collar. "Miss Everett," he said with a nod, "you're looking well." Eleanor touched her hair self-consciously, suddenly aware of the plain work dress she wore and the smudge of herb powder likely on her cheek. "Mr. Daniels, welcome. I told you I come for supplies every other Saturday," he reminded her, a hint of warmth in his voice. Before she could respond, her uncle emerged from the back room. "Ah, Wyatt, right on schedule. I have Mr. Harrington's order ready." He gestured to a wooden crate on the counter. "The usual liniments and salves, plus that special order of quinine from San Francisco." While Jonathan went through the contents of the order, Eleanor busied herself with her work, stealing glances at Wyatt. In town clothes, he looked somewhat different, still unmistakably a cowman, but with a polish that suggested he might have once moved in more refined circles. When the business was concluded and the supplies loaded into Wyatt's saddlebags, he lingered at the counter. "Miss Everett," he said after a moment, "I wonder if you might be free to take a turn about the town. The weather is fine, and I thought you might appreciate some air after being inside all morning." Eleanor's surprise must have shown on her face, for he quickly added, "With your uncle's permission, of course." Jonathan waved a hand with a smile. "By all means." "It's a slow day, and Eleanor has been working hard. Take your time." 10 minutes later, having changed her apron for a light shawl and splashed water on her face, Eleanor found herself walking beside Wyatt down Agua Caliente's Main Street. The mid-October day was pleasantly warm, the harsh summer heat finally giving way to the gentler temperatures of autumn. "How are you finding frontier life?" Wyatt asked as they navigated around a mud puddle left from yesterday's brief shower. "Different," Eleanor admitted. "But not in all the ways I expected. People here are more interdependent than in Boston. Everyone seems to know everyone else's business, but they also look after one another." Wyatt nodded. "That's the way of it out here. A man or woman alone doesn't last long. We all need each other, even the ones who pretend they don't." He guided her around a hitching post where several horses were tied. "Your uncle is well respected, not just for his medicines but for his character. He's turned no one away, regardless of their ability to pay." "I've noticed," Eleanor said, thinking of the many customers who had settled their accounts with eggs, fresh vegetables, or promises of future payment. "He says it's the right way to practice his profession." They walked past the hotel, the sheriff's office, and the general store, exchanging greetings with townspeople along the way. Eleanor noticed how many people seemed to know and respect Wyatt, from the bank manager who tipped his hat to the group of Mexican laborers who called out friendly words in Spanish, which Wyatt returned in kind. "You speak Spanish?" she asked, impressed. "Enough to get by," he replied with a modest shrug. "Worked on ranches in Texas and New Mexico before coming to Arizona, had some good teachers." At the edge of town, they stopped beside a small creek that gave Agua Caliente its name. The water bubbled warmly over rocks, steam rising gently in the cooler air. "Hot springs feed it," Wyatt explained, seeing her curious expression. "The Apache considered this place sacred long before white settlers arrived, said the waters had healing powers." He smiled slightly. "Might be why your uncle chose to set up shop here." Eleanor knelt to touch the water, surprised by its warmth. "It's beautiful," she said, watching the play of light on the rippling surface. This territory has its own kind of beauty, Wyatt agreed, his voice softening as he gazed not at the creek but at the mountains in the distance. Not as grand as the eastern forests or as lush as California, but it gets under your skin nonetheless. There was something in his tone that made Eleanor look up at him with new curiosity. "Have you always been a rancher?" she asked. A shadow seemed to pass over his face. "No," he said after a moment. "I was a lawyer once back in St. Louis, came west after the war. The war." The simple phrase carried weight, as it did whenever anyone mentioned those 4 brutal years that had torn the nation apart. Eleanor had been a child when it ended, but she remembered the gaunt faces of returning soldiers, the endless lists of the dead in newspapers. "You fought?" she asked quietly. Wyatt nodded once, his expression closing like a door. "Union cavalry. Let's just say when it was over I needed open spaces and uncomplicated work." He offered her his hand to help her rise. "We should head back before your uncle worries." Eleanor sensed she had touched a tender spot and didn't press further. As they walked back toward town, the conversation turned to lighter topics: the upcoming Harvest Festival, the new school being built at the edge of town, the traveling theater company rumored to be visiting before Christmas. Outside the apothecary, Wyatt paused. "Thank you for the company, Miss Everett." "Eleanor," she said impulsively. "Please call me Eleanor." Something flickered in his eyes, surprise perhaps, or pleasure. "Eleanor," he repeated, as if testing the sound of her name. "Then I'm Wyatt, not Mr. Daniels." "Wyatt," she echoed with a small smile. "Will you be at the Harvest Festival next weekend?" "I hadn't planned on it," he admitted. "Such gatherings aren't usually to my taste." "Oh," Eleanor tried to hide her disappointment. "Of course, I understand." Wyatt studied her face for a moment, then said, "But perhaps I'll reconsider. Mr. Harrington usually sends someone from the ranch with a donation for the church auction." "I hope you do," Eleanor said, feeling a blush rise to her cheeks. "Reconsider, that is." With a tip of his hat and a rare smile that transformed his serious face, Wyatt mounted his horse. "Until next time, Eleanor." She watched him ride away, aware that something fundamental had shifted between them in the space of a simple walk. No longer merely the cowboy who had saved her life. Wyatt Daniels had become something more: a man of depth and mystery, with a past as complex as the territory he'd chosen to call home. The week leading up to the Harvest Festival passed slowly for Eleanor, each day filled with the usual tasks but now overlaid with anticipation. Would Wyatt come? Had she been too forward, inviting him so openly? What did it mean that she cared so much about seeing him again? Her uncle noticed her distraction with amusement but without comment. It wasn't until the evening before the festival, as they closed the shop, that he broached the subject. "Wyatt Daniels is a good man," he said casually, counting the day's receipts. "One of the best I've known out here." Eleanor fumbled the jar she was shelving. "I'm sure he is." Jonathan peered at her over his spectacles. "He's also a man who carries heavy burdens from his past. The war changed him, as it did so many." He set down his pencil. "I'm not blind, Eleanor. I see how your eyes light up at the mention of his name." "Uncle John," she protested weakly. "I'm not disapproving," he assured her. "Quite the opposite. A man of Wyatt's character would be fortunate to win the affections of a woman like you. I merely suggest patience." "He's not one to open his heart easily." Eleanor sighed, abandoning pretense. "I barely know him. It's foolish to feel. Whatever this is." Her uncle's smile was gentle. "The heart rarely consults with reason before choosing its path." He patted her hand. "Just be careful with yours, my dear. And perhaps with his as well." The Harvest Festival transformed Agua Caliente from a dusty frontier town into a place of celebration and community. Lanterns hung from every available post. Tables groaned under the weight of food contributed by townsfolk and surrounding ranches, and music filled the air from a small band assembled on the steps of the church. Eleanor, wearing her best dress, a deep blue calico with lace at the collar, helped her uncle arrange his contribution to the festival. Small sachets of dried herbs and flowers that would fragrance clothing chests throughout the winter. Around them, the townspeople mingled and laughed, the usual social barriers temporarily lowered in the spirit of the occasion. Miss Everett, Mr. Everett, Sheriff Marshall approached, tipping his hat. Fine evening for a celebration. Indeed it is, Sheriff, Jonathan agreed, shaking the lawman's hand. How goes the search for the Chambers gang? Any progress? The sheriff's expression darkened slightly. Not as much as I'd like. They've gone to ground somewhere in the hills, but we'll get them eventually. He turned to Eleanor with a smile. I hear you had a close call with those outlaws when you first arrived. Fortunate that Daniels found you. Eleanor nodded, trying not to scan the crowd for Wyatt yet again. Very fortunate. As if conjured by the mention of his name, a familiar figure appeared at the edge of the gathering. Wyatt, dressed in clean black trousers and a white shirt, stood observing the festivities with a slightly wary expression. Beside him was Mr. Harrington. Along with several other men, Eleanor recognized from the Double Creek Ranch. Her heart quickened as Wyatt's gaze found her across the crowded square. He nodded once, a gesture simultaneously formal and intimate. Eleanor barely heard the sheriff's continued conversation as she watched Wyatt and Mr. Harrington approach her uncle's table. John, Mr. Harrington greeted, his voice gruff but friendly. Fine display as always. Frederick, Jonathan replied with equal warmth. Good to see you in town. I was beginning to think you'd become a complete hermit out at Double Creek. The two older men fell into conversation while Wyatt stood slightly apart, his hat in his hands. Eleanor, he said quietly, you look lovely. The simple compliment sent warmth flooding through her. Thank you for coming, she replied. I wasn't sure you would. I found I had reason to reconsider my usual habits, he said, his eyes never leaving her face. The band struck up a livelier tune, and couples began forming for a dance in the cleared space at the center of the square. Eleanor watched them, a mixture of longing and uncertainty on her face. Would you care to dance? Wyatt asked, surprising her. Yes, she stammered. I would like that very much. He offered his arm, and she placed her hand upon it, feeling the solid strength beneath the fabric of his shirt. As they moved toward the dancing area, Eleanor was acutely aware of the glances and whispers that followed them. Wyatt Daniels, the reserved Double Creek foreman, dancing at a town festival was apparently noteworthy. I'm afraid I'm out of practice, Wyatt confessed as they took their places among the other couples. It's been some years since I attended such a gathering. I suspect it's like riding a horse, Eleanor said with a small smile. The body remembers. The music guided them into motion, and Eleanor discovered that Wyatt moved with unexpected grace for such a tall man. His hand at her waist was respectful yet secure, his steps confident despite his disclaimer about being out of practice. You dance very well for a man who avoids social gatherings, she observed as he guided her through a turn. A hint of amusement touched his eyes. I wasn't always a solitary cowman. There was a time when such events were a regular part of my life. In St. Louis, when you were a lawyer. Eleanor ventured, remembering their conversation by the creek. Wyatt nodded, a shadow of remembered pain briefly crossing his features. Another lifetime ago. Eleanor wanted to ask more about his past, about what had driven him west, about the ghosts that sometimes darkened his eyes, but she sensed it wasn't the time. Instead, she focused on the feel of his hand in hers, the rhythm of their steps, and the rare pleasure of seeing Wyatt Daniels almost relaxed. They danced twice more before taking a break for refreshments. Wyatt procured cups of punch and led Eleanor to a quieter spot near the edge of the festivities. "Thank you," she said, accepting the drink. "I'm enjoying myself immensely." "As am I," Wyatt admitted, sounding almost surprised. "More than I expected to." Their conversation flowed more easily now, touching on books they had both read, places they had seen, and the peculiarities of life in Agua Caliente. Eleanor found herself laughing at Wyatt's dry observations about certain townsfolk, while he listened with genuine interest to her stories of growing up in Boston. "My father was a doctor," she told him. "He wanted me to have an education beyond what was typical for young women. I think he secretly hoped I might follow in his footsteps someday, though of course that wasn't possible." "Why not?" Wyatt asked, his gaze direct. Eleanor blinked, surprised by the question. "Well, because women aren't permitted in medical schools." "A rule made by men who fear competition," Wyatt said with unexpected vehemence. "I've known several women out here who have more medical knowledge and skill than half the so-called doctors with degrees. Your talent shouldn't be limited by arbitrary restrictions." His passionate defense caught Eleanor off guard. "That's a surprisingly progressive view." Wyatt looked away, as if embarrassed by his outburst. "The frontier has a way of stripping away pretensions. Out here, what matters is ability, not the accident of one's birth or gender." He set down his empty cup. "Would you like to walk a bit? It's growing crowded." They strolled to the edge of town, where the festivities faded to a pleasant hum behind them. The night was clear, stars scattered like diamond dust across the dark canvas of the sky. "I never saw stars like this in Boston," Eleanor murmured, tilting her head back to take in the vast expanse above them. "Too many buildings, too much smoke." "It's one of the compensations for frontier life," Wyatt agreed, his voice soft in the darkness. "The sky seems endless out here." They stood in companionable silence, shoulders nearly touching. Eleanor was acutely aware of Wyatt's presence beside her, his height, his warmth, the faint scent of soap and leather that seemed to cling to him. "Eleanor," he said finally, turning to face her. "I'm not a man given to easy words or hasty feelings, but I find myself thinking of you far more than is probably wise." Her heart thundered in her chest. "Why would that be unwise?" Wyatt's expression was solemn in the starlight. "Because I'm not sure I have anything to offer a woman like you. My life is complicated. There are parts of my past I've never shared with anyone out here." "I'm not asking for your past," Eleanor said quietly. "Only a chance to know you as you are now." He studied her face as if searching for something vital. Whatever he saw there must have reassured him, for he reached out slowly, giving her plenty of time to withdraw, and touched her cheek with calloused fingers. "May I call on you properly?" he asked, his voice rough with emotion. "Not just on supply days, but as a suitor." Eleanor covered his hand with her own, holding it against her cheek. "I would like that very much." The moment stretched between them, fraught with unspoken possibilities. For an instant, Eleanor thought Wyatt might kiss her, but instead, he gently withdrew his hand. "We should return to the festival," he said, though his reluctance was evident. "Before your uncle sends out a search party." As they walked back toward the lights and music, Wyatt offered her his arm once more. Eleanor took it, feeling as though something precious and fragile had begun to take shape between them, something that required care and patience, but that held the promise of deeper joy than she had ever known. True to his word, Wyatt began calling on Eleanor regularly in the weeks following the Harvest Festival. Sometimes these visits were brief, a quick stop at the apothecary shop while in town on ranch business. Other times, he would arrive on Sunday afternoons when the shop was closed, and take Eleanor for walks or buggy rides through the surrounding countryside. Jonathan observed this courtship with quiet approval, often finding reasons to busy himself elsewhere in the shop when Wyatt arrived. "A man and woman need space to discover one another," he told Eleanor when she thanked him for his discretion. "Besides, I've never seen Wyatt look so alive as when he's talking with you." It was true that a transformation seemed to be taking place in the reserved ranch foreman. He smiled more readily now, occasionally even laughed aloud at Eleanor's wry observations about town life. The shadows that had haunted his eyes appeared less frequently, though they never disappeared entirely. For her part, Eleanor found herself falling deeper into feelings she had never experienced before. Wyatt's combination of strength and gentleness, his evident intelligence, and the careful way he treated her as an equal partner in conversation, never dismissing her opinions or talking down to her, awakened something profound within her heart. Their courtship progressed with the careful deliberation that seemed to characterize everything Wyatt did. He was unfailingly respectful, never presuming or pushing beyond the boundaries of propriety. When they walked together, he offered his arm but did not attempt to hold her hand. Their conversations, while increasingly personal, never strayed into subjects that might embarrass either of them. Yet beneath this propriety, Eleanor sensed a deepening current of feeling. She saw it in the way Wyatt's eyes followed her movements, in the slight tremor of his hand when their fingers accidentally brushed, in the reluctance with which he said goodbye at the end of each visit. As November drew to a close, and the desert air grew crisp with the approach of winter, Wyatt invited Eleanor to accompany him to a small gathering at the Double Creek Ranch. "Mr. Harrington hosts a dinner each year for the senior ranch hands before he returns east for Christmas," he explained as they rode in his buggy through the golden afternoon light. "He asked specifically if I would bring you. I think he's curious about the woman who's turned his antisocial foreman into a regular visitor to town." Eleanor laughed, adjusting the shawl around her shoulders. "Am I being presented for inspection, then?" "More like I'm being subjected to scrutiny," Wyatt replied with a wry smile. "The men have been merciless with their teasing." "They must care for you a great deal," Eleanor observed, "to take such interest in your happiness." Wyatt's expression softened. "They're good men. We've been through some difficult times together, drought, rustlers, even a brush fire 2 summers ago that nearly took the north pasture. Builds a bond of sorts." "Like soldiers," Eleanor said quietly. Wyatt glanced at her sharply, then nodded once. "Yes, not unlike that." They rode in silence for a time, the rhythmic clip-clop of the horse's hooves and the creak of the buggy wheels the only sounds. Eleanor watched the landscape unfold around them, the saguaro cacti standing like sentinels against the sky, the distant mountains painted in shades of purple and blue, the occasional jackrabbit darting across their path. "It's beautiful, isn't it?" Wyatt said, following her gaze. "In its own harsh way." "Yes," Eleanor agreed. "I never thought I could love such an unforgiving place, but I find myself more drawn to it each day." She hesitated, then added softly, "Perhaps it's not just the land that's captured my heart." Wyatt's hands tightened on the reins. For several moments he said nothing, and Eleanor feared she had been too forward. Then, in a voice rough with emotion, he spoke. "Eleanor, I'm not a man who finds it easy to speak of feelings, but I want you to know that these past weeks have been the happiest I can remember since before the war." He kept his eyes on the road ahead. "You've brought something into my life I thought was lost forever." Eleanor's heart swelled with joy at his words. "And you into mine," she replied simply. They exchanged a glance charged with unspoken meaning before Wyatt returned his attention to driving. As they approached the Double Creek Ranch, Eleanor saw that the main house was decorated with pine boughs and red ribbons, a concession to the coming holiday season that surprised her. "Mrs. Holloway insists," Wyatt explained, noting her expression. "Says a house should look festive, even in the desert." The dinner itself was less formal than Eleanor had anticipated. Mr. Harrington, gruff but hospitable, presided over a long table laden with a surprising variety of dishes. Mrs. Holloway had outdone herself, serving roast beef, venison stew, several vegetable dishes, and fresh bread that filled the dining room with its homey aroma. The conversation flowed as freely as the wine, with the ranch hands exchanging stories and good-natured ribbing. Eleanor, seated between Wyatt and Tom, the oldest of the Cowboys, found herself drawn into tales of ranch life, cattle drives gone awry, horses with personalities as distinct as humans, the challenges of ranching in a land where water was more precious than gold. And then there was the time Wyatt faced down that mountain lion with nothing but a broken branch, Tom was saying, his weathered face animated with the telling. "Coolest head I ever saw." Cat was about to pounce on young Jed, who'd fallen from his horse, and Wyatt just stepped between them, calm as you please, and stared that beast down until it slunk away. Eleanor turned to Wyatt with wide eyes. "You never told me about that," he shrugged, clearly uncomfortable with the attention. Tom exaggerates. The cat was probably more confused than intimidated. "Don't let him fool you, Miss Everett," Mr. Harrington called from the head of the table. "Wyatt's modesty is as outsized as his courage. He saved this ranch more times than I can count from weather, rustlers, and bad business decisions on my part." He raised his glass. "To Wyatt Daniels, the finest foreman in the Arizona Territory." "To Wyatt," the others echoed, glasses lifted high. Eleanor joined the toast, her eyes meeting Wyatt's across the rim of her glass. The pride and affection these men felt for him was palpable, and she understood why. In the weeks she had known him, she had glimpsed the depth of his character, his unwavering sense of duty, his quiet strength, his fundamental decency. After dinner, while the men retired to the porch for cigars, Mrs. Holloway enlisted Eleanor's help with coffee and dessert. "He's different with you around," the older woman said as they arranged slices of apple pie on plates. "Lighter somehow, less burdened." "He carries a great deal," Eleanor observed, "though he rarely speaks of it." Mrs. Holloway nodded, her expression knowing. "The war left scars on many men, not all of them visible. But a heart can heal with the right kind of care." She handed Eleanor a tray of filled coffee cups. "Just be patient with him. Some wounds take time to mend completely." The evening concluded with music. Marcus proved to be skilled with a fiddle, while Carlos produced a guitar and played haunting Mexican melodies that filled the ranch house with their poignant beauty. To Eleanor's surprise, Wyatt was persuaded to sing a single song, a ballad about a soldier returning home to find his sweetheart waiting. His voice, deep and surprisingly true, hushed the room. The lyrics spoke of longing, separation, and the healing power of faithful love. As he sang the final verse, his eyes found Eleanor's across the room, through war and peace, through storm and sun, through all the battles fought and won. I carried you within my heart, a light when all the world was dark. The simple words, delivered without flourish but with unmistakable feeling, brought tears to Eleanor's eyes. When the song ended, a reverent silence held the room for several heartbeats before applause broke the spell. Later, as Wyatt drove Eleanor back to town beneath a canopy of stars, a new intimacy existed between them, as if the evening had peeled away another layer of reserve from their relationship. "Thank you for bringing me tonight," Eleanor said, her voice soft in the darkness. It meant a great deal to see you among your friends, to understand more of your life here. They're like family, Wyatt admitted. The closest thing I have, at least. You mentioned once that you had no family left, Eleanor ventured carefully. May I ask what happened to them? For a long moment, Wyatt was silent, and Eleanor feared she had overstepped. But then he began to speak, his voice low and measured. My parents died when I was in law school. Fever took them both within a week of each other. My younger brother, James, joined the Union Army in '62, same as I did. He fell at Gettysburg. He paused, the memories clearly painful. I had a wife once back in St. Louis, Margaret. She couldn't. After the war, I wasn't the same man she had married. The things I'd seen done. We tried, but in the end she left, married a banker from Chicago. Eleanor's heart ached for him. I'm so sorry, Wyatt. He shook his head slightly. It was a long time ago, and in truth I couldn't blame her. The man who came back from the war was a stranger even to himself. His hands tightened on the reins. That's why I came west. To find somewhere I could start fresh, where no one knew the man I had been. And did you? Eleanor asked gently. Find a fresh start. Wyatt was quiet for a moment, considering. I found purpose in the work, in building something worthwhile at Double Creek. Found a measure of peace in the open spaces. He glanced at her, his expression softened by starlight. But until recently, I'm not sure I'd found joy again. The implication of his words hung in the air between them, too significant to ignore yet too delicate to address directly. Instead, Eleanor reached across the space separating them and placed her gloved hand atop his. I'm glad you found your way west, she said simply, and that you were riding in the desert that night. Wyatt turned his hand beneath hers, their fingers intertwining in a gesture more intimate than any they had shared before. So am I, Eleanor, so am I. As winter settled over Agua Caliente, milder than the brutal Massachusetts, winters Eleanor had known, but still bringing cooler temperatures and occasional rain, the courtship between Eleanor and Wyatt deepened. He began joining her and her uncle for Sunday dinners after church, bringing small gifts that revealed his growing understanding of her tastes. A book of poetry by Elizabeth Barrett Browning, a pressed wildflower from a remote canyon, a delicate silver brooch from a Navajo silversmith. For Christmas, which the Everetts celebrated quietly in their rooms above the apothecary, Wyatt presented Eleanor with a hand-carved wooden box for her herbs and medicines. The craftsmanship was exquisite, with her initials inlaid in a darker wood on the lid. Did you make this? She asked, running her fingers over the smooth surface. Wyatt nodded, a rare flush of color touching his cheeks. During the evenings, Carlos taught me some of his woodworking skills last winter. It's beautiful, Eleanor breathed, deeply touched by the time and care the gift represented. I shall treasure it always. Her gift to him was more practical but no less personal, a leather-bound journal with his name stamped on the cover, and a fountain pen of German silver. You mentioned once that you used to write, she explained as he examined the journal. Letters, legal documents, but also thoughts, ideas. I thought perhaps you might wish to begin again. The look Wyatt gave her was filled with such tenderness that Eleanor's breath caught in her throat. Thank you, he said simply, but the words carried the weight of deeper meaning. Jonathan, observing this exchange with twinkling eyes, raised his glass of spiced cider. To new beginnings, he proposed, and the courage to pursue them. As winter gave way to the first stirrings of desert spring, Eleanor and Wyatt's relationship continued to evolve. They had not spoken of marriage or formal engagement, but an unspoken understanding seemed to exist between them, a shared acknowledgement of where their hearts were leading. Then, in early March, everything changed. The day began like any other. Eleanor was in the apothecary grinding dried herbs for a cough remedy when the shop door burst open. Sheriff Marshall stood in the doorway, his expression grave. "Miss Everett," he said, removing his hat. "Is your uncle here? It's urgent." Jonathan emerged from the back room, wiping his hands on his apron. "What's happened, Sheriff?" "Chambers' gang," Marshall replied grimly. "They hit a ranch 10 miles south yesterday, killed 2 hands, stole horses and cash." He hesitated, glancing at Eleanor. "There's more. They left a man badly wounded, gunshot to the chest. He managed to ride to the edge of town before collapsing. Doc Sullivan's with him now, but it doesn't look good. He's asking for medicines, laudanum, alcohol, clean bandages." "Of course," Jonathan said immediately, already gathering supplies. "Eleanor, prepare a packet of the wound powder, the one with the yarrow and comfrey." Eleanor moved to obey, her mind racing. "Who was injured, Sheriff?" she asked, dreading the answer. Marshall looked uncomfortable. "It's Wyatt Daniels, miss. He was visiting the Cordova ranch when the gang attacked." The world seemed to tilt beneath Eleanor's feet. She gripped the counter to steady herself, her face draining of color. How bad is it?" "Bad enough," the sheriff admitted. "Bullet caught him just below the collarbone. He's lost a lot of blood." Jonathan placed a steadying hand on his niece's shoulder. "Eleanor will bring the medicines to Doc Sullivan immediately," he told the sheriff. "She has nursing experience and may be able to assist." Eleanor nodded, forcing herself to focus on the task at hand rather than the fear threatening to overwhelm her. With practiced movements that belied her inner turmoil, she gathered the necessary supplies into a leather satchel. "Where is he?" she asked, her voice remarkably steady. "Doc's office," Marshall replied. "I'll escort you." The walk to the doctor's office, though only a few blocks, felt interminable. Eleanor clutched her medical satchel, her mind filled with terrible images of Wyatt bleeding, suffering, possibly dying. "No," she told herself fiercely. "I will not lose him. Not now, not when we've only just found each other." Dr. Sullivan's office was a small adobe building near the center of town. Inside, the sharp smell of antiseptic and the metallic tang of blood filled the air. The doctor, a grizzled man in his 60s with hands gnarled by arthritis but still remarkably deft, looked up with relief when Eleanor entered. "Miss Everett," he said. "Good. I need an extra pair of capable hands." Eleanor barely heard him. Her attention was fixed on the figure on the examination table. Wyatt lay motionless, his face ashen beneath his tan, his shirt cut away to reveal a blood-soaked bandage covering his upper chest. His eyes were closed, his breathing shallow and uneven. "Wyatt," she whispered, moving to his side. She touched his face gently, alarmed by the heat radiating from his skin. "I'm here." His eyelids fluttered open, revealing eyes glazed with pain and fever. "Eleanor," he rasped, seeming to struggle to focus on her face. "You shouldn't see me like this." "Hush," she soothed, fighting back tears. "Save your strength. We're going to help you." Dr. Sullivan approached, examining the contents of Eleanor's satchel. "Your uncle's wound powder is better than anything I have," he admitted, "and I'll need your assistance. My hands aren't what they once were, and I need to extract the bullet before infection sets in." Eleanor nodded, removing her shawl and rolling up her sleeves. She had assisted her father with similar procedures in Boston, though never on someone she loved. The thought sent a jolt through her. Yes, loved. She loved Wyatt Daniels with a depth and certainty that transcended their relatively brief acquaintance. "Tell me what you need me to do," she said to the doctor, her professional demeanor asserting itself. The next hour was a blur of controlled urgency. Eleanor administered laudanum to dull Wyatt's pain, then assisted Dr. Sullivan in removing the bullet, a gruesome procedure that required all her willpower to remain calm and focused. Throughout, She spoke softly to Wyatt, anchoring him with her voice as he drifted between consciousness and oblivion. When the bullet was finally extracted, they cleaned the wound with alcohol and applied the herbal powder before bandaging his chest tightly. "Doctor." Sullivan stepped back, wiping blood from his hands. "He's young and strong," the older man said, his voice low. "But he's lost a lot of blood and there's risk of infection. The next 48 hours will tell the tale." Eleanor nodded, her eyes never leaving Wyatt's face. "I'll stay with him." "Miss Everett," the doctor began. "I'm staying," she repeated, her tone brooking no argument. "I have nursing training and he has no family. I won't leave him alone." Dr. Sullivan studied her face for a moment, then nodded slowly. "Very well. There's a cot in the back room where I sometimes rest. You can use that when you need to sleep." He gathered his instruments. "I'll inform your uncle." After the doctor left, Eleanor pulled a chair close to Wyatt's bedside and took his hand between both of hers. His skin was hot and dry, his pulse rapid beneath her fingers. "I'm here, Wyatt," she whispered, though she wasn't sure he could hear her. "I'm not going anywhere. You need to fight now, do you understand? Fight to stay with me." Through that night and into the next day, Eleanor maintained her vigil. She bathed Wyatt's fevered body with cool cloths, changed his bandages, and coaxed small amounts of water between his cracked lips. When delirium took him, she held his hands to prevent him from tearing at his wounds, speaking calmly through his confusion. Sometimes he called out names she didn't recognize, orders to unseen soldiers, pleas for forgiveness. Other times he seemed to know her, his fevered gaze focusing on her face with desperate clarity. "Eleanor," he rasped during one such moment, his fingers clutching weakly at her hand. "If I don't," she interrupted fiercely. "Don't you dare say goodbye to me, Wyatt Daniels. You're going to recover. You're going to be fine." A ghost of his familiar half-smile touched his lips. "Stubborn woman," he murmured before slipping back into unconsciousness. Jonathan came to check on them, bringing fresh supplies and insisting that Eleanor rest while he watched over Wyatt. She reluctantly agreed, stretching out on the cot in the back room, but sleep eluded her. Every sound from the main office, every murmur, every labored breath brought her instantly alert, her heart racing with fear. On the second night, Wyatt's fever broke. Eleanor, dozing in the chair beside his bed, woke to find his face relaxed in natural sleep, his breathing deeper and more regular. When she touched his forehead, the burning heat had subsided to merely unusual warmth. Relief coursed through her like a physical wave, leaving her weak and trembling. "Thank God," she whispered, pressing her lips to his hand. "Thank God." Dawn was breaking when Wyatt opened his eyes again, truly conscious for the first time since his injury. He blinked slowly, his gaze finding Eleanor's tired face. "You look terrible," he rasped, his voice weak but lucid. A laugh that was half-sob escaped her. "Such flattery, Mr. Daniels." "How long?" he asked, wincing slightly as he tried to shift position. "Nearly 3 days since they brought you in," Eleanor replied, helping him take a sip of water. "You've been very ill." Wyatt's expression grew serious. "Chambers' gang, they came out of nowhere." Old man Cordova tried to protect his granddaughter. They shot him without hesitation. His jaw tightened with anger and grief. "Is he alive?" Eleanor assured him. "His injury was less severe than yours. He's recovering at home." Relief softened Wyatt's features. "Good, that's good." He looked around the doctor's office. "Have you been here the entire time?" Eleanor nodded, suddenly self-conscious about the impropriety of her actions. "I couldn't leave you," she said simply. Wyatt's eyes, though still shadowed with pain, held hers with an intensity that made her breath catch. "Eleanor," he said, his voice strengthening with emotion. "When I was lying there at the Cordova ranch, bleeding into the dust, all I could think about was you. that I might die without telling you." "Telling me what?" she prompted when he faltered. "That I love you," he said, the words emerging rough but clear. "That I have loved you since that first day in the desert when you looked up at me with those brave, determined eyes, even though you were half dead from thirst and fear." Joy bloomed in Eleanor's chest, so powerful it brought tears to her eyes. "I love you too," she whispered, leaning forward to press her forehead against his. "So much that it frightens me sometimes." Wyatt's hand, weak but determined, came up to cup her cheek. "Marry me," he said softly. "Not someday, not eventually, as soon as I can stand before a preacher without falling over." Eleanor laughed through her tears, covering his hand with her own. "Yes," she said without hesitation. "Yes, I'll marry you, Wyatt Daniels." In the golden light of dawn, with the sounds of Agua Caliente awakening around them, they sealed their promise with a gentle kiss, their first, but far from their last. Wyatt's recovery progressed slowly but steadily. After a week in the doctor's office, he was well enough to be moved to a room at the hotel, where Eleanor continued to visit him daily, bringing nourishing broths and herbal teas to build his strength. Jonathan, with a twinkle in his eye that belied his solemn demeanor, acted as chaperone during these visits, a concession to propriety that both Eleanor and Wyatt accepted with good grace. News of their engagement spread quickly through the small community. Most reactions were positive, though Eleanor noticed a few raised eyebrows and whispered comments about the speed of their courtship. Such concerns meant little to her. Near death had a way of clarifying what truly mattered in life. Mr. Harrington arrived from the Double Creek Ranch as soon as he heard about Wyatt's injury, bringing with him offers of support and assistance. "The ranch can manage without you until you're fully recovered," he told Wyatt firmly. "Tom and Marcus know what they're doing. Your job is to get well and prepare for married life." With a gruff affection that clearly embarrassed Wyatt, he added, "About time you found some happiness, son." As March gave way to April and desert wildflowers painted the landscape in brilliant hues, Wyatt regained enough strength to take short walks with Eleanor. His left arm remained in a sling, and he tired more quickly than he would admit, but the color had returned to his face and the shadow of death had receded from his eyes. During these walks, they spoke of their future together, practical matters like where they would live, how Eleanor might continue her work with medicines, whether Wyatt would remain foreman at Double Creek or consider other possibilities. "I've saved a fair amount over the years," Wyatt told her as they sat on a bench near the creek that gave the town its name. "Enough to buy a small ranch of our own if that's what we decide." Eleanor considered this, watching the play of light on the warm water. "Would that make you happy? Having your own place rather than managing someone else's?" Wyatt was silent for a moment, thoughtful. "I've been content at Double Creek," he said finally. "Harrington is a fair employer and the work suits me, but a man thinks differently when he has a wife to consider, children someday perhaps." He glanced at her, a question in his eyes. "What would make you happy, Eleanor?" She smiled, touched by his consideration. "I want to continue helping people with my medicines," she said. "Whether that's in town or from a ranch home doesn't matter so much to me, as long as we're together." Wyatt's expression softened with tenderness. "Together," he agreed, taking her hand in his. "That's what matters most." As Wyatt's strength returned, so did his determination to see justice done. The Chambers gang remained at large, despite increased efforts by Sheriff Marshall and a posse of volunteers. Reports placed them in the hills to the east, still raiding isolated homesteads and eluding capture. "They'll grow bolder if they're not stopped," Wyatt said during a meeting with the sheriff and several townsmen in the hotel dining room. "Eventually, they'll hit the town itself." Sheriff Marshall nodded grimly. I've telegraphed the territorial governor requesting additional men, but until they arrive, we're on our own. I'll ride with a posse as soon as the doctor clears me, Wyatt declared, his jaw set with resolve. Eleanor, who had been listening from nearby, felt a cold knot of fear form in her stomach. "Wyatt," she said later when they were alone, "you nearly died the last time you encountered these men. Please don't rush back into danger." Wyatt took her hands in his expression serious. "Eleanor, I understand your fear, but these men threaten everything we're trying to build here, not just you and me, but everyone in this community. I can't stand by while they terrorize innocent people. And I can't lose you," she whispered, her voice catching. "Not now." Wyatt drew her close, mindful of his healing wound. "You won't lose me," he promised, his breath warm against her hair. "I'm too stubborn to die, remember, and I have too much to live for." Their wedding was set for the first Sunday in May, a compromise between Wyatt's desire for immediacy and Eleanor's wish for at least some semblance of a proper ceremony. The small church in Agua Caliente would host the service, followed by a celebration in the town square, with food and music contributed by friends and neighbors in the frontier tradition. Eleanor, with help from Mrs. Holloway and several other women in town, altered a cream-colored silk dress that had once belonged to the hotel owner's daughter. Wyatt, meanwhile, ordered a new suit from Tucson, enduring good-natured teasing from the ranch hands about his uncharacteristic attention to appearance. As the wedding day approached, however, tension hung over the celebration preparations. The Chambers gang remained at large, and rumors placed them closer to town with each passing day. Sheriff Marshall increased patrols and posted guards at night, but the sense of vulnerability was palpable. 2 days before the wedding, disaster struck. Eleanor was in the apothecary arranging dried flowers for her bridal bouquet when gunshots shattered the afternoon quiet. She rushed to the window in time to see several riders galloping down the main street, firing indiscriminately. People scattered for cover, screams and shouts filling the air. "The bank," Jonathan exclaimed, grabbing his shotgun from beneath the counter. "They're hitting the bank. Eleanor, stay inside." Before she could respond, her uncle was out the door, joining other townsmen who were running toward the commotion. Eleanor stood frozen, torn between obedience and concern. Then a terrible thought struck her. Wyatt was due to meet with the bank manager today about their wedding gift from Mr. Harrington. Without hesitation, she grabbed her medical satchel and hurried outside. The street had become a battlefield, with the outlaws barricaded inside the bank and townsmen firing from whatever cover they could find. Sheriff Marshall was orchestrating the defense, directing men to surround the building while civilians evacuated nearby structures. "Eleanor." A familiar voice called her name, and she turned to see Wyatt crouched behind a water trough, his gun drawn. Relief flooded through her. "Get back inside. Are you hurt?" she called back, ignoring his order. "No, but others are. Doc Sullivan needs help." He gestured toward the hotel, where several injured townspeople had been taken. Eleanor nodded and made her way carefully toward the hotel, keeping to the shelter of buildings. Inside, chaos reigned as Dr. Sullivan attempted to treat multiple gunshot wounds with limited assistance. "Miss Everett," he said with evident relief. "Thank God. I need your help with these men." For the next hour, Eleanor worked alongside the doctor, cleaning and bandaging wounds, administering pain medication, and offering comfort to the injured. Most had suffered relatively minor injuries, grazing wounds, or injuries from flying debris, but 2 men were seriously hurt, with bullets lodged in dangerous locations. Outside, the gunfight continued in sporadic bursts. Each shot made Eleanor flinch, her mind filled with images of Wyatt exposed to danger once more. Please, she prayed silently as she bandaged a young man's arm. Please keep him safe. When the shooting finally stopped, an eerie silence fell over Agua Caliente. Eleanor paused in her work, exchanging a concerned glance with Dr. Sullivan. What did the silence mean? Victory or defeat? The answer came moments later when Sheriff Marshall entered the hotel, his face grim but determined. "It's over," he announced to the room at large. Chambers' brothers are dead. 2 of their gang surrendered, one's wounded but alive. He surveyed the injured. "How bad is it here, Doc?" "Too critical, 8 with minor injuries," Sullivan replied. "No deaths yet, thank God." Eleanor stepped forward, her heart pounding. "The townsman, my uncle." "Wyatt, your uncle's fine," the sheriff assured her. Showed surprising courage for a shopkeeper. His expression grew more somber. "Wyatt took a bullet, but it's not serious, shoulder wound, clean through. He refused to come in until the others were tended to. Stubborn fool." Relief made Eleanor's knees weak. "Where is he?" "Outside, helping secure the prisoners." Marshall shook his head with reluctant admiration. "Man shouldn't even be on his feet, much less handling outlaws, but try telling him that." Eleanor excused herself from the doctor's side and hurried outside. The street was now filled with people emerging from hiding places, surveying damage, helping the injured. Near the bank, she spotted Wyatt, his left sleeve dark with blood but standing straight as he spoke with Jonathan and several other men. "Wyatt Daniels," she called, her voice sharp with concern and relief as she approached. "What part of recovering from a gunshot wound do you not understand?" He turned at the sound of her voice, his tired face lighting with a smile that made her heart skip. "Eleanor, are you all right?" "Am I all right?" she repeated incredulously, already examining his bleeding shoulder. "I'm not the one who seems determined to collect bullet holes like some men collect stamps." Wyatt winced as her gentle fingers probed the wound. "It's nothing serious. Barely grazed me." "This is not a graze," she contradicted, her professional assessment at odds with his dismissal. "You're coming with me right now so I can clean and bandage this properly." Jonathan, observing this exchange, hid a smile behind his hand. "Best do as she says, son. I've learned it's useless to argue with an Everett woman once her mind is made up." Wyatt allowed himself to be led away, though not before ensuring the prisoners were securely in the sheriff's custody. As Eleanor guided him toward the apothecary, townspeople called out thanks and congratulations. Word had already spread of Wyatt's role in the defeat of the Chambers gang, how he had outflanked them when they tried to escape through the bank's rear entrance, how his marksmanship had taken down the notorious Jacob Chambers himself. "You might have been killed," Eleanor said quietly as she cleaned his wound in the privacy of the apothecary's back room. "Again, 2 days before our wedding." Wyatt captured her busy hands in his. "Eleanor, look at me." She raised her eyes to his, unable to hide the fear and worry that had consumed her. "I'm sorry you were frightened," he said, his voice gentle, "but I couldn't stand aside while those men threatened our town, our future." His thumb caressed her wrist. "The difference is, this time I had something to come back to, someone who makes me want to be more careful than I might have been before." Eleanor felt tears threaten. "Just promise me you won't make a habit of this. I don't think my heart could take it." Wyatt's smile was tender as he released her hands so she could resume bandaging his shoulder. "The Chambers gang is finished. Agua Caliente will be safer now. And after Sunday, my most dangerous activity will be trying to be a good husband to a woman who's far too good for me." Eleanor secured the bandage with practiced efficiency. "I'll remind you of that the first time we disagree," she said, a smile finally breaking through her worry. The wedding of Wyatt Daniels and Eleanor Everett, held beneath the blossoming trees in front of Agua Caliente's small church, became a celebration not just of their union, but of the town's deliverance from the shadow of fear that had hung over it for months. Eleanor, wearing the carefully altered silk dress with wildflowers in her hair, walked down the aisle on her uncle's arm to where Wyatt waited, tall and solemn in his new suit. Despite the bandage visible beneath his shirt and the sling supporting his injured arm, he had never looked more handsome to her, his gray-blue eyes clear and focused entirely on her approach. "Dearly beloved," the preacher began, his voice carrying clearly in the hushed church. "We are gathered here today in the sight of God and this company, to join this man and this woman in the bonds of holy matrimony." The ceremony itself was brief but deeply moving. Eleanor and Wyatt had written their own vows, simple declarations of love and commitment that reflected the directness and honesty that characterized their relationship. "Eleanor," Wyatt said, his deep voice steady despite the emotion evident in his eyes, "I came west searching for something I couldn't name: peace, purpose, a place to belong. I never expected to find all of those things in one person. You've brought light back into my life when I thought the darkness had won. I promise to cherish you, protect you, and walk beside you through whatever joys and sorrows life brings us. This is my solemn vow." Eleanor, fighting back tears of joy, responded with equal sincerity. "Wyatt, when I journeyed to this territory, I was seeking only safety and a new beginning after loss. What I found was a courage I didn't know I possessed, a community I've come to love, and a man whose strength and gentleness have captured my heart completely. I promise to stand with you, care for you, and love you faithfully all the days of my life. This is my solemn vow." The exchange of rings, Wyatt's a plain gold band, Eleanor's a delicate circle set with a small sapphire that had once belonged to his mother, sealed their promises. When the preacher finally pronounced them husband and wife, the kiss they shared was both tender and profound, a testament to the journey that had brought them to this moment. The celebration afterward spread throughout the town square, with tables laden with food, musicians playing lively tunes, and children darting between the adults in games of tag. Mr. Harrington presented the couple with their wedding gift, a deed to a small parcel of land adjacent to Double Creek Ranch, with a modest but well-built house. "Close enough that Wyatt can continue as foreman," he explained, "but with your own place to call home. The previous owner returned east last winter homesick for trees," he said. The older man smiled at their stunned expressions. "Consider it payment for years of loyal service and for ridding us of the Chambers gang." As the sun began to set, casting the desert in hues of gold and crimson, Wyatt led Eleanor away from the festivities for a moment of privacy. They walked to the edge of town, where the warm creek bubbled over rocks and the first stars were appearing in the darkening sky. "Mrs. Daniels," he said, testing the sound of her new name, "are you happy?" Eleanor looked up at her husband, this man who had found her voice when it was hoarse from crying for help, who had said she didn't have to ask twice, who had become the center of her world in ways she had never imagined possible. "More than I ever thought possible," she replied, standing on tiptoe to kiss him. "And you, Mr. Daniels, any regrets about tying yourself to a stubborn Easterner with ideas about medicine and women's capabilities?" Wyatt laughed, the sound rich and unreserved in a way that still delighted her. "Only that I didn't find you sooner," he said, drawing her close with his good arm. "Think of all the arguments we could have had by now." Eleanor rested her head against his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. "We have time," she murmured. "A lifetime." "A lifetime," Wyatt agreed, pressing a kiss to her hair. "And I intend to make the most of every day of it." They remained there, wrapped in each other's arms as darkness fell completely and the desert night enfolded them in its vast, star-studded embrace. Behind them, the lights of Agua Caliente glowed warm and welcoming their home, their community, the place where their future would unfold. And it was enough. More than enough. It was everything. In the years that followed, Eleanor and Wyatt built a life that exceeded even their most hopeful expectations. Their small house near Double Creek Ranch became a warm and welcoming home, gradually expanding as their family grew. Eleanor continued to work with her uncle in the apothecary, developing new remedies and earning a reputation throughout the territory for her healing skills. When Jonathan finally retired 5 years after their wedding, he signed the business over to his niece, who renamed it Everett and Daniels Apothecary and Medical Services. Wyatt remained foreman at Double Creek, but also began breeding and training horses on their own land, specially selected animals known for their intelligence and stamina. His methods, gentler than was common in the territory, attracted attention from ranchers and cavalry officers alike, providing a secondary income that allowed them increasing independence. Their first child, a son they named William Jonathan, arrived a year after their wedding, a strong, serious baby with his father's gray-blue eyes and his mother's determined chin. 3 years later, they welcomed a daughter, Margaret Rose, whose infectious laugh and adventurous spirit kept the entire household on their toes. "She reminds me of you," Wyatt often told Eleanor as they watched their daughter fearlessly exploring the world around her. That same courage, that same curiosity. Life on the frontier remained challenging: droughts, occasional outbreaks of disease, the constant work required to maintain a home and livelihood in such an unforgiving environment. But they faced these challenges together, their partnership growing stronger with each obstacle overcome. They had their disagreements, of course. Wyatt's protective instincts sometimes clashed with Eleanor's independence. Her progressive ideas occasionally met with his more traditional views. But they had learned early in their marriage the art of honest communication, of listening as well as speaking, of finding compromise without sacrificing principle. On their 5th wedding anniversary, they rode together to the spot in the desert where Wyatt had found Eleanor that fateful night. The landscape was unchanged, the same rugged beauty, the same vast sky, the same silence that could feel either threatening or peaceful depending on one's circumstances. "I still have nightmares sometimes," Eleanor admitted as they dismounted near the boulder where she had collapsed. "About being lost out here, calling and calling with no one to hear." Wyatt took her hand, his palm warm and calloused against hers. "But I heard you," he said softly, "and I always will." She smiled up at him, this man who had rescued her in more ways than one. "I know." As Agua Caliente grew from a frontier outpost into a proper town with a school, a larger church, eventually even a small hospital where Eleanor served as head nurse, the Daniels family remained at its heart. Their home became a gathering place for neighbors, for travelers in need, for anyone seeking help or healing. Wyatt, once so solitary, found himself surrounded by friends and family, his past sorrows not forgotten but balanced by present joys. The nightmares that had once plagued him, echoes of battlefields and lost comrades, gradually receded, replaced by dreams of the future he was building with Eleanor. When their 3rd child, another boy, James Frederick, was born in the summer of 1883, Wyatt held his infant son with a sense of wonder that had not diminished with repetition. 3 children, he marveled, sitting beside Eleanor's bed as she rested after the birth. "If someone had told me 10 years ago that this would be my life, I would have said they were mad." Eleanor reached out to touch his weathered cheek, love swelling in her heart. "A good life," she said softly, "not without its hardships, but good nonetheless." "The best," Wyatt agreed, leaning down to kiss her with tenderness that had only deepened with the passing years. Because of you, always because of you. Outside their window, the Arizona sunset painted the desert in gold and crimson, the same colors that had filled the sky on the evening they wed. Within their home, children's laughter mingled with the ordinary sounds of a family at day's end, water boiling for tea, a dog barking at some distant sound, the creak of floorboards beneath familiar feet. It was, Eleanor thought as she drifted toward sleep with her newborn son beside her and her husband's hand clasping hers, exactly the life she would have chosen had she known all possible futures. A life built on love that had begun with a cry for help in the wilderness, and a cowboy who hadn't needed to be asked twice. A perfect, imperfect, wonderful life.